Very important day to do the fist pumps. And an unfortunate day. As before we get into everything, I was finishing up our shows yesterday and got a text. Didn't want to talk about it until I knew it was confirmed because unfortunately that happens in the world of sports and entertainment. But the unfortunate passing of Sid yesterday at the age of 63. There you see him as the WWF champion, former WCW champion, a man who never stayed put for long, but always made an impact wherever he showed up. And very sad to read about that and hear more about that from his family since yesterday. And my good friend Tommy Dreamer always says in these moments is you celebrate the life. That's what tends to happen, I think, especially in wrestling, is when someone, especially if Sid's stature passes away, you celebrate that life. And I will say that is one of the great things about wrestling Twitter, wrestling social media, is when something like this happens, all the other BS goes away, or it should at least. And it just becomes a sharing of memories. And it becomes a sharing of clips. And you hear stories you hadn't heard before. Or you bring up some wonderful nostalgia of growing up or memories of someone like that are personal memories. I'm going to share a couple of those on the show today. I never met Sid, but I saw him wrestle plenty of times. And not to say you look forward to that when someone passes in the wrestling world, but it is something that I expect when someone has that kind of stature, that kind of career, that kind of resume, those kind of memories. I always kind of expect, okay, wrestling Twitter's going to now celebrate this man's life and career. And that's what it's been. Ever since yesterday afternoon when the news came out and was unfortunately confirmed, the amount of stuff people have shared about Sid, about different points in his career, like a show recently about, childhood wrestling or what you watched as a wrestler, or as a child growing up in wrestling. And I love the memories that created. And you see it from different angles and different ages. And, I grew up during the 80s, so it was these guys. I grew up during the 90s, so it was these people. I grew up, and it was John Cena and Randy Orton. And, Bailey's been on lists. And I love sharing that in wrestling. And that's what the last day has turned into when it comes to Sid, is people sharing, hey, I watched him as Lord Humongous. I remember when he tagged with Shane Douglas. I remember him in the Skyscrapers with Danny Spivey. I also love, the fact that people were sharing, and my goodness, what is more Twitter and Instagram friendly than squash matches? Because how quick they go. Friend of the show, Tom Green, posted one, and people were like, God, that's the greatest squash match ever. If there was anyone ever made to be the winner in a squash match, it was Sid, because of his look. I mean, JBL's always had the line, right? Randy Orton was, you could draw up a sports entertainer, you had Randy Orton. I'm paraphrasing. To me, if you could draw up a pro wrestler in every shape and form, it was Sid. Look, power, promos, height. I mean, it's all there. The guy was meant to be a professional wrestler. And it's not easy for people to get over if they don't have all the attributes, if they are not the prototypical wrestler. And sometimes it's all there for somebody. The gifts are there. The look, the strength, the size, you name it's there, and they don't put it together. Sid did. Sid was one of those people, because of how he looked, was always going to get that chance and get more chances. But he didn't need a lot of chances because he caught your eye. You want to talk about the airport test? The airport tests had always been passed with flying colors by Sid. You see somebody looks like that, you turn. Whoa. Then you find out he's a wrestler, or you see him debut. I got to see more of that guy. I want to see more of that guy. Holy hell, that was unbelievable what he did. And I am not surprised to see so many people sharing stories of their childhood, because I think at times we can lose that wrestling is not just for adults, and that wrestling, especially back then, was, more for kids. Cartoon, larger than life, big characters, imposing figures. You could look at stories and gimmicks and things and go, God, that's so corny. But think about them from the eyes of a child, what that looks like. Was Undertaker scary to you growing up? Was Papa Shango scary to you growing up? You could look back now and go, my God, that stuff was so goofy. But people hiding their eyes, being scared. Why? Because they believed. And Sid, when he walked through the curtain with his look and his intensity, made you believe. And then he'd get in the ring and just wreck people. But so much of what was shown yesterday from different eras and still being posted today, it shows you the kind of impact he had on so many different generations. And I know the stories, it was softball season, so he left. And in an odd way, while promoters may not have liked that, it kept Sid fresh. And you know what? Even if he left and went to the next place, it was Sid. He had a magnetism to him. So sure, he might leave WCW to go back to WWF or vice versa, whatever. But he's gonna get the push. It's not like there's a mid-card run for Sid. It was almost he had to be pushed. He was undeniable in that way. You couldn't put him anywhere else. Not many people have that. Just an undeniable figure in wrestling, no matter what he did or how he left companies. Look, you go back to SummerSlam 1991, right? And he makes the jump. Looked like he was going to get a big push in WCW. He leaves. And they put him in as the special guest referee for that god-awful, Triangle of Terror versus Hogan and Warrior SummerSlam match. And, way overdone at that point. But then they definitely positioned him as a babyface to come make the save for Macho and Liz with the Cobra in the Coliseum home video exclusive, against Jake and Taker. And then he gets a little banged up. And what happens? The most important and memorable Royal Rumble of all time, Royal Rumble 1992, he eliminates Hulk Hogan. Completely fairly, by the way. He didn't do anything wrong. Every man for himself. Over the top rope. And Hulk gets pissed and he costs Sid the match. And they booed it. And if you want to talk, by the way, if you want to talk about how a wrestling company can make it work, how they want to make it work, with some little post-production, Hogan got cheered, Sid got booed. And that's how it can live on forever. People know who watched the show live, knows what happened. But the fans were happy. They were happy that Sid eliminated Hogan, and they were pissed that Hogan pulled him over the top rope. And then they do the press conference where they make the call on who's facing Flair for the title, and that sets up Sid and Hogan. And Sid, at the time, comes out at WrestleMania 8 and kicks out of the leg drop. Hadn't happened. And then there's, the Papa Shango running in late and all that stuff and the heel turn. But, remember that WrestleMania 8 match it's a double main event in what could be Hulk Hogan's final match. Like that. I love that intro. It's one of my favorites. And Hogan main evented WrestleMania 8, even though Savage was the champ with Flair. And that had its own drama. And Sid turned and whatever, and the DQ in the main event for Warrior to come back. But remember, Warrior gets fired at SummerSlam 91. Sid got his push. Then he got it again later on. Like they swapped pushes down the road. Sid main evented 2 WrestleManias. He main evented 8 with Hogan, and he main evented 13 with Taker. And I'm not saying either one of those is unbelievable. I'm saying the guy main evented 2 WrestleManias in between leaving the company and working elsewhere. Why? Because he was undeniable. People would kill to have that kind of reputation. People would wish that they could have that kind of presence. Sid had it. And I don't think all of Sid's booking was great, and some stuff, in the WCW stuff got corny, and obviously we know how his WCW run ended with the broken leg, which then the company exploited, and God knows how much of a mess they were at that point. He showed it on Nitro and all that crap. But Sid went along with a lot of that stuff sometimes, even when he would leave the company. And I found out today that the first person he powerbombed after he broke his leg was someone called Big Larry. Someone who just wrestled Braun Breaker for the Intercontinental Championship. Yes, Sami Zayn. I remember Sid with Judge Jeff Jones in ECW and just kind of having that presence. And Jeff tweeted about it yesterday. Jeff, who's working for AEW behind the scenes now, he tweeted about that, and I said, man, I thought actually there was more to that run. And you don't know all the details of why it didn't happen or whatever. But that's because Sid looked cool there, I saw AIW post Sid there, and, he was in like some kind of tag team called The New Shit. It just seemed like when he would pop up, people would pop. And I have a personal memory of Sid, and I've told the story of the first show I ever went to. I went to a house show on February 23rd, 1992 at Madison Square Garden. So it's a month after Flair has won the Royal Rumble and is the champion. And I think I'll tell it again, but when I worked at WWE, I was talking with Giancarlo, who was, I think people know, one of the best video people out there, promos, vignettes, spring break, stuff for AEW, you name it. But he was working WWE at the time, and he was asking me about looking up stuff, or he was showing me stuff. And I was like, hey, I was at the show at the Garden in 1992. I remember MSG was broadcasting stuff. See if we have it. And he found it. And we watched a couple things, Rowdy Piper and Repo Man, and Repo Man steals some woman's watch in the front row as a plant, and Roddy gets it back, and they do it. But at the end of the night, everybody who had wrestled on the card was in the Battle Royal. So actually, I did not realize that the show, and I correct me if I'm wrong and anybody here, they broadcast that show live on MSG that day. So I had no idea. I was at a live TV. It wasn't really a house show. It was a house show that was on MSG Network. So, not necessarily part of the weekly television, but went along with the storylines. Kind of like a house show does now. And I went back and looked at the results, and I had forgotten Sid wins the Battle Royal at the end of the night. He beats Hercules in 5 seconds. And this stuff is now available. It was an MSG Classics. It's on YouTube. Sid wins the Battle Royal at the end of the night. However, the reason I didn't remember that, in the words of Bruce Pritchard and Vince, I guess, Hogan must pose. All I remember was Sid winning the Battle Royal, but Hogan throwing a non-folding chair in the ring to clear the ring, and then he posed to end the show and send everybody home happy. Because you're not going to end a Garden show with a heel going over. No, it did happen, but then Hogan posed. So Sid was victorious not once, but 2 times in the first show I ever attended as a wrestling fan. And I still remember the, what would we call it? Teal trunks he wore, even though I think you think of him in black all the time. Or the George Slater on. Or he wore yellow or the Lord Humongous stuff or anything. I think you think of Sid in black, but I remember the teal trunks vividly. I know there's some red in there, skyscraper stuff. And the other thing I think about Sid is Survivor Series 1996. Shawn Michaels was not having what the company wanted in terms of a run as a champion. I don't think. You think of, he beat Bret at WrestleMania 12 in 96, and you go from there. And Sid, the year before, the Sid and all that stuff, all that. Sid had turned him on him the night after WrestleMania 11 and blah, 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 blah. But Shawn, the NWO starts up in 96 and ECW starting to pick up, a little bit more steam. And Shawn is a very baby face, white meat baby face guy at that time. So he has, the Mind Games match with Mankind, and that kind of gives him a little more of an edge. But at Survivor Series 1996, when they didn't go with Vader, and probably correctly so, and yeah, Shawn was a baby about that kind of stuff. But Shawn and Sid at Survivor Series 1996. Sid comes out of that pretty well-known aisleway at the Garden that so many people had walked before him, the one that is dead on to the ring, not what, the show had turned into with the side entrance for Raw and all that. I'm talking that dead shot. You've seen it at Rumbles. And he comes out with that Survivor Series, the Karate Fighters logo on Survivor Series. And there is an intensity of, oh, shit. That's the guy. I like that guy. And the Garden got behind Sid. He is giving some of the most intense fist bumps you will see. He had his people on that night, and he had the majority of the crowd of Madison Square Garden, and they absolutely paid attention to that stuff. And he had them on that night, and they booed Shawn, and Sid took out Jose Lothario, and Sid won. And you know what? It was the right call. Shawn needed obstacles to overcome. And Sid became champion. And it was the right move. Because the crowd wasn't with Shawn like the company needed them to be with him. You'll often hear the first World Championship reign, especially for a babyface, is an audition for the future ones to come. I'm not saying Shawn was a bad champion. I'm just saying he wasn't connecting with enough of the audience. So when Sid won, okay, now we're in November. We know we're getting to San Antonio. We know we're getting to the Alamo Dome. Shawn's back at home. There's retribution. There's revenge. Taking Jose Lothario out with the camera, all that kind of stuff. And it was the right way to put the title back onto Shawn. Obviously, everything that happens, it's back in the main event of WrestleMania 13 anyway, because losing his smile and all that, but they built Shawn back up. Now, of course, the story was Shawn was supposed to lose back to Brett at 13, doesn't do business, whether his knee was hurt or lost a smile, all that. But what did they do? Sid beats Shawn at Survivor Series when they don't go with Vader. There's Sid. Sid can handle it. Sid drops the title to Shawn at the Alamo Dome. They get the moment and getting Shawn back on track as a champion. And then what happens? Well, because of Fatal 4-Way and Shawn losing the smile, they do the Fatal 4-Way and Brett wins and Austin, all that stuff. And then Sid beats Brett the next night because they weren't going to do Brett and Shawn. And the beginnings, and this is where, that's why I think, like, you start at Survivor Series 1996. When I say to start in a year, people want a jumping off point for someone wrestling. Survivor Series 1996 is an excellent jumping off point because it leads into one of the greatest years in wrestling history for multiple companies. But think about where they were at. They go back to Sid for the title. He wins it. He loses to Shawn. The night after Final Four, he wins it back. And they go him and Taker at WrestleMania. Not because it was the plan, because they needed to go somewhere else because of Shawn. And they go back to Sid. Was it a great match? No. WrestleMania 13 is pretty awful except for Austin and Brett. But it showed the reliability and the presence and the drawing power of what Sid was. And obviously Sid would continue on and we would see him in WCW and all. Whether he was in the company or out of the company, wherever he showed up, you sat up and paid attention. And that, to me, is the mark of a hell of a wrestler. And I see all the stories being shared about him, wanting to be around his grandkids and, still going to T-ball and working out and all that. Booker T told a story about how if it wasn't for Sid, they wouldn't have got into the wrestling business. And RVD told a story when he was doing, enhancement talent work. They, him and a guy he worked with made Sid look good, so Sid paid him more. There's the squeegee thing and the stuff with Arn and all. I don't care about that. And it doesn't seem like a lot of people are talking about that stuff, so there's no need to. I am happy that people are celebrating the career of someone who clearly jumped off the page and made an impact. And made a lasting memory for so many people. Hey, this is Matt Camp. Thanks for checking out one of our recent clips from the Wrestling Mat. Why is someone so close to The Rock kind of throwing Cody under the bus?
Yeah, a lot of people won't engage with Jim Cornette. I did, just because I have a mark for Jim Cornette. And
Please subscribe right now. Hit the like and turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing. And I think you should listen to your TV partners. Let me tell you about WWE and a little insight. More subscribers means more content. And make sure you follow us on social media at WrestlingMat23 on both Twitter and Instagram.